took the exam in 2020, and so it's been a little over, what are we in, 22? So I guess about a year since I've been a CAE, and my journey started just like y'all's did. So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little bit of exam overview. I'll kind of talk to you guys about what my experience was going through the exam itself, and then we'll jump into some test questions. And before I forget, I'm just going to say this, and I'll try and remember to say this again before we start the exam questions and going through that. But just remember that these exam questions are provided to us by, I believe, ASAE. Terry, correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't want y'all to focus on the way they're written. Everybody knows that they're difficultly written in a way that sometimes they just don't always make a lot of sense. But that's not what we're focusing on today. We're focusing on test taking strategies and how to get to the right answer. So I'm going to leave it at that, and then we'll go through them, and you'll see what I'm saying, and we'll work through those again. Terry, got a couple of people in the waiting room. Is it okay if I let them in? Gonna let them in. Okay. All right. So. All right. My first advice to you all is just know yourself and what works for you. And the reason why is because you know yourself best. And when you're going to go take the test, you'll have some options. You'll have the option to either take it in the morning or the afternoon. Think about if there's a certain day of the week that works best for you. For me, Fridays were the best. And I have teenagers. Well, I did have a lot of teenagers. Mine are becoming empty nest. I'm becoming an empty nester. But I chose to do it in the afternoon because my house is kind of loud at night. And so I figured Friday afternoon would be good for me. And so just also know how you're going to manage your feelings. For me, I'm an emotional eater, so I made sure I had a snack for myself when it was a break time so I could munch on that. And so just think through those things and employ strategies that work for yourself. And I want to say, if you guys have questions for me, just feel free to chime in. Don't feel like you have to raise your hand or anything. So this slide is about what types of questions are on the exam, and you'll see that advocacy is on the lower end, and then there's about 10% of governance, and then the membership and stakeholder engagement and management and the operational strategy. And then the biggest part, I mean, you can just see as it progresses, but the biggest piece is executive leadership. And this to me means that you need to really be thinking very broadly, thinking strategic level and through the lens of executive leadership. And there's a lot of scenarios on the exam. There's some fact questions and there's tons of reading. So we're going to go through, as we go through some of the exams, some of the questions we'll talk about, how you can kind of synthesize the question and then synthesize the answers and do a process of elimination. All right, so on this slide, I want to iterate that time is of the essence. So make the most out of your 4 hours. Make sure you're comfortable. Make sure you kind of think through your strategies on what's going to work for you, as we talked about in that first slide. For me, I wear glasses, and I was really thankful that I have a little bit of blue light film or whatever that technology is on my glasses, because it's a lot of reading, and it's a lot of reading on that bright white screen. And then, so I don't know if you guys have that ability to grab some blue light glasses, but if you do have them, I would recommend that that's what you wear that day, not your contacts. Bring a snack and make sure you're hydrated, and then dress in layers. Who knows what that environment's going to be like? You could be sitting right underneath the vent, and it's blowing hot air or cold air, and you want to be able to make, you know, your own adjustments to your body's comfort.
Marie, can I just ask a question to the group for the May exam? Has has ASA said whether they will continue to offer both the option for to do it remotely and or in person? Did you all have to choose that when you signed up?
Terry, is that question to me or?
No, I'm sorry, it's to the group. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody had heard.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I can try to answer that. I think it said that some people might be able to take it virtually if you have specific needs. That was what I saw when I applied.
Okay, I didn't know if ASA was going to be moving it back to basically do it in person unless you had certain situation for virtual.
That's the impression I got when I applied.
Great. So when you're there and if you are in person and you are using the computer screens, I found that that there was, the exam showed up in the top left quadrant, and you know, you have this really big screen and we're used to using our whole screen, but literally it takes up just the top left quadrant. And so it's not very big. So I would recommend that you use the control and scroll on your mouse just to give it a little bit of a bump. Don't go too far, because if you go too far, then it kind of messes up the ability to click around on the screen. But that was helpful. Also adjust your brightness. My screen, like I said, it was just glaring bright. And so I just kind of toned it down a little bit. Adjust your seat, make sure you're comfortable, and make sure you have a pencil and paper. I know of someone who the proctor told them, yeah, I'm going to bring you a piece of pencil and paper in just a second. Go ahead and get started. They got started 45 minutes into the exam. They finally got their paper, and you'll see here in a second, I'm going to go over some test strategies, but they were exhausted by the time that pencil and paper came. So don't start until the paper comes, because time is of the essence. You only got 4 hours. Okay, so during the exam, so read the question. Make sure you read the question. And some questions are, you'll have scenarios, and so there'll be like a big blurb and then the question. In those instances, what you want to do is you want to read the question first and then read the blurb. So get the question, figure out what the key words are, and then read the blurb. You also want to decide if the question is spy, LERP, and we'll go over those terms here in just a second as well. But if you can, decide if that question is asking about a spy or LERP. Also take note of what the key words are in your question, and note the domain if you can. And then read, so I just talked about that. So read the learning part, for the reading part first. Second, and then what worked for me is I just wrote A, B, C, D on my paper. Actually, I wrote it a whole bunch of times so that I could just get ahead. And then as you're going through your questions, you're going to cross off the wrong ones as you go through. So a lot of times you're going to see 2 wrong answers and 2 right answers. And if you can, go ahead and just knock out those 2 wrong ones. And then you're only going to be seeing the 2 right ones. And then you're going to be looking for the most right answer. And the most right answer is likely going to be the most broad, big thinking, leadership. And then just mark them off. And then most importantly, number 6, do not second guess yourself. That's really hard to do, especially if you have a little bit of extra time left over. You may want to go back and just double check your answers. But I don't know what the statistics are, but I just have heard over and over again, just don't second guess yourself. And I think that's a good idea. All right, so the CAE mindset. So the CSE is the Chief Staff Executive, and then the CEO is Chief Elected Officer. Throughout your exam and throughout your studies right now, you're going to see CSE, and that is the lens that you're going to be looking through. I know that sometimes in our worlds, out in the association world, we use the word CEO, but for the purposes of this exam, we are not. And then all questions should be answered through the mindset of a CAE. So you're looking at 501c6 and 501c3. I know there's a lot of 501cs out there, but those are the two that you're primarily going to be looking through. That needs to be through a national. So this can be a little bit difficult for, you know, some of us who are working at state or local levels. When you're taking the exam, think about how this would be handled if you were a national organization with 60 or more staff and, you know, you have unlimited resources. And, you know, maybe as you're going through your day-to-day, if you're, you know, coming up against a challenge, think about what you would do if your situation is just a little bit different, and beginning to kind of reframe in your mind how you perceive your day-to-day challenges will help you prepare for this exam. Be sure to stay focused on the big picture, and also know that DEI is a big part of this exam. You're not going to see a lot of DEI questions in your practice questions that we're going to be doing today. I don't think there are any today. And I don't know about the other exams that are coming ahead of you, you know, practice questions that are coming ahead of you, but make sure you brush up on that in your studies and be prepared to answer questions that are related to DEI. Okay, any questions so far? Feel free to pipe in. Okay, so SPY, it stands for Scan, Plan, Implement, and Evaluate. When you're looking at SCAN, you're looking for what is the problem? What do we need to know about the problem? Who are the stakeholders? What should we do first? A lot of times you're going to see the question survey someone or survey a group, and that's how you're going to scan. So if you see the word survey in one of the answers, or, you know, that's going to, you know, you automatically think scan. Plan is what's the first thing we need to do. And one of your keywords for that is next. What's next? Implement is executing the plan. So, you know, well, executing the plan, y'all know what that is. Evaluate. And then, so that's just looking back, reflecting on what went right, what didn't go right, and how you would do it differently next. So there's some questions up here if we want to go through them and just kind of talk through them. So who wants to tell us what a post-conference debrief would be? What if it falls under scan, plan, or implement, or evaluate?
Evaluate.
Correct. How about survey stakeholders?
Scan.
Mm-hmm. And hiring a staff person.
Implement.
Mm-hmm. And then budgeting.
Plan.
Yes, that's correct. I will say though, you won't see a question, you probably won't see budget on there. If you do see budget, it's the wrong answer. Just because for the purposes of this test, they consider unlimited budget. So let's keep that in mind. All right, so LERP, legal, ethical, responsible, and procedural. So most important, and it goes in order from importance. So legal is the most important in this hierarchy. This is a hierarchy, and then procedural is at the very bottom. So legal, is it legal? If not, you should contact legal authorities. If you're unsure, you're going to contact your attorney. Ethical, just ask, is it right? Is this the right thing to do? And responsible, when you think of responsible, is it also another right thing to do? Is it procedural, what does the manual say, like your policy and procedure manual? And that one's not as, I mean, it's important, but it's not as important as, is this challenge that we're facing right now legal? Also, I want to, before we jump into some other resources, I just want to say that member to member and staff to staff and CSE to president, those are your relational, the way you guys, the way you interact with others. So if there's ever a problem with staff to staff, not CSE or board member to staff, member to member, address their own challenges. And then if there's ever a challenge that the president has with staff, it would go to the CSE. And the CSE would also relay back to the president. And also, I want to let you all know if an option has anything to do with conducting a survey or talking to an attorney, or the CEO talking to anyone except for association staff, that's probably the right answer. All right, any questions before we move on? All right, so these are just some of your resources that you have available to you. And all of you all are resources to each other. So as you're going through study questions, looking through your reading materials that you're working on, be sure to reach out to each other, help each other along the way. And if there are other CAEs that you know, reach out to them. I'm also available to reach out to you. Terry, I'm sure, is available to you. I found the ASCE handbook extremely helpful to me in my studies. I also found the Association Law Handbook extremely helpful. This 12 steps for thinking through an exam is a handout that I believe Terry is going to give to you guys. And while I did not have that handout when I took my exam, I did read through that, and that would have been very helpful. So be sure to check that out. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead to our exam questions. Okay, so the way we did this last time, it worked out really well, is that we just went around the room and just worked through the question. So the person who's up would just read the question and then read the answers and then just work through the process of elimination. So is this spy, LERP, or something else? What are your keywords? And then eliminating your wrong answers. So then you only have 2 correct answers, and then just working through why one is more correct than the other, and then we'll eventually result with the correct answer. And as I mentioned at the beginning, some of these questions are worded poorly, but we're not focused on the wording. We're focused on how to work through a question. The exam questions, the actual exam questions, are not worded in a difficult way. I think there were only a couple that I was like, what are you saying? But I think they do an accommodation for that. Terry, I see your camera came on. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, there was a couple of questions in the chat. Abby had asked about the link in the slide you had a couple slides earlier in terms of resources. I'll go ahead and make the PowerPoint available to everyone after the session, along with the recording of the session as well. And then the second question was, I believe, about the PPAM. So the version 4 of the PPAM came out a few months ago. I think it was right before the end of last year. So that's number 4. The study guide that you have does not have, there's some reference to 4, but you will find some of the chapters don't align. We're aware of that. ASA is aware of that. I think they have tried where they can to put references to where things are in the PPAM, where they're different chapter alignment than in PPAM 3. But more importantly, ASA has said the content between the PPAM 3 and PPAM 4 is not dramatically different. So if you have 3 instead of 4, that's fine. 4 is just the most current one.
Yeah.
They will eventually update everything so it aligns, but unfortunately the study guide came out and then they updated the PPAM months later. So they're in catch-up mode right now.
Okay, thanks, Terry.
Any other questions before we get into the practice? Yes. Did you mention an email with a list of the study group participants sent this morning? Yes. Did other people receive that email? I sent it to the group. I see Abby's thumbs up. Okay, so some of you got it. Okay, not everyone. Okay, if you didn't get it, just send me a individual email to terry@vsae.org and I'll check what's going on with your email.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let's jump into these practice questions. I'm going to go in order of how y'all are appearing on my camera feed. So I'm going to have Abby come up first, if you don't mind. And if you'll just read the question, and if it's up to you if you want to read the answers out loud. And then if you could just do the process of elimination, also determine if it's SPY. Well, first you should actually determine if it's SPY or LERP, and then figure out what your keywords are in the question, and then do a process of elimination.
Sure. Which of the following could give rise to personal liability on the part of directors and officers? So I was going to go with LERP, legal issues, incompetence and bad judgment, intentional injury or damage to others. I was going to say C, performance of contracts entered into by an associate. Well, actually, no, I take that back. D, activities and actions of a committee that lead to antitrust violations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would actually be a really big problem.
Okay.
And so I'm going to point you back to the question, and let's go over the keyword. And the
Sure.
keyword in this question is personal liability. So
Okay.
when we know it's personal liability as a set instead of like association liability, does that change your answer?
Personal liability.
Mhm.
It does not change my answer. I would definitely not say C.
Right. C is definitely not the right answer. And D's not right either, because that it's talking about the actions of a committee. And so that's still
Okay.
part of the whole body. And so that wouldn't be, since you're part of that collective body, that wouldn't be personal liability. So we're going to
Okay.
eliminate C and D, and that leaves us with A and B. And so with that in mind, what would you choose? And also remember, we're thinking, well, go ahead. Sorry. That wouldn't sorry.
Right now, they're equal in my mind. They relate to the individual person doing something
Mhm.
badly or poorly.
Yeah. Well, the law book says that you can't really be held for, you won't be held for incompetence or bad judgment. And I'll refer you back to read up on that, because I personally, I think that's difficult to wrap my mind around, but intentional injury is the correct answer. And that one is because you're purposely injuring someone or doing damage. And that's why that one is the correct one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Any questions, anyone, about this question? All right, Abby, thanks so much for going first.
Absolutely. Thanks for walking me through it.
Yeah, no problem. All right, Gordon, I have you up next. Would you mind?
Sure, we'll give it a shot. What is the proper relationship between a CSE and a board chair? So I think here we're talking LERP, legal, ethical, responsible, procedural. So your options here are: a board chair supervises a CSE and leads the board. B, a board chair and CSE should be friends and confidants to one another. C, a CSE keeps the board chair informed of the direction of the association. D, the two are partners with specific areas of focus. The CSE on operations and the board chair has a link to the volunteers and members. Well, one, never a friend with a board member, so I'm going to rule out B. That's the easy one for me. Two, the CSE keeps the board chair informed of the direction of the association. Possibly. C is possible. D looks a little more focused on what I would suggest as the area where we need to kind of work on that. So I would go with D, or A are my two ones I'm looking at the most, and I'll go with D of the two.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. A is correct, and D is correct, but D is the most correct. It's the most broad answer. So thanks, Gordon.
Hey, thanks for telling me to eliminate the two easy ones.
Yeah. Okay, Melissa, I have you next. Would you mind?
Sure. What is the best practice as it relates to the relationship between a 501c6 and its subsidiary 501c3 foundation? All right. So I think that this is the best practice as it relates to a relationship. A LERP. And then a policy should be established that defines the relationship between the two entities. The 501c6 can use the foundation as a tax shelter for revenue generated through its educational programs. C, managerial responsibility for the subsidiary should always be given to a member of the association staff. And D, once the subsidiary is incorporated, there should be no documented relationship between the two entities in order to protect the insular nature of each corporate board. I mean, because I don't know the answer, just working through what you gave us there. And I don't currently work with any 501c3s, just to be, totally transparent there.
So what is your key word out of the question? What would you say the key word is?
Best practice and subsidiary.
Yeah, I would go with relationship. And a lot of times when you see relationship, that's going to be a key to your answer. A lot of being a CSE is relationship building. So, we talked about member to member, staff to staff, and making sure those relationships stay intact. And also we hear about how components would work with national and making sure those relationships are working out. And so same thing here between a 501c6 and 501c3, we're talking about the relationship here. So see if that makes a difference when you're reading through those answers.
So I would take out C then. I don't know where to go from here, to be honest.
Okay, yeah, so C is you're right on with taking that one out. I would also take out D, because it talks about there should be no documentation between the relationships. So why would you create another organization and just not even document that you have it? So I would remove that one. So now we're down to B and A. And those would be the two correct answers, but which one is the most right answer based on this question?
Yeah, I would guess that the most broad answer would be A.
Right, because A talks about the relationship between the two entities and B is talking about the tax. And while that's correct, that doesn't explain the relationship. And going back to that keyword. That was good. So any questions about this question? All right, thank you, Melissa. All right, Katrina, I have you next. Would you mind?
Sure. What are the policies, important tools in volunteer management? Or why are the policies important tools in volunteer management? A, to affirm boundaries and are enforceable. B, to create expectations and suggest guidelines. C, to motivate volunteers to operate at a higher level. And B, to fulfill legal requirements for nonprofit organizations. And I would say that this is going to fall under SPY. I think.
Well,
this is
not all questions are going to fall into SPY or LARP. And I would say this one probably doesn't, because this isn't a scenario question.
Okay.
So I should clarify that. So SPY and LARP are typically going to fall under more like scenarios in some cases. I guess some of the other ones weren't really scenarios, but I wouldn't say this one's, if anything, I would say LARP because it has to do with policies and procedures. So why are policies important tools?
Okay. All right.
What would you say your keyword is in this one, or keywords?
I would say policies is the key word here, and the fact that it's an important tool. So,
Okay.
and I think the first answer I would remove would be C.
Right.
And then I guess I would probably go ahead and remove B after that. Well, actually, I don't know if I would remove B. Maybe actually, I actually wonder if B isn't the correct answer, but I'm torn between,
It is. B is the
Okay.
correct answer. So I would say your two keywords are policies and volunteer management. And so we want to, when you're thinking about this question, think about what policies for what? For volunteer management.
mhm,
And so you're right with eliminating C, and because policies just, they don't motivate anyone to do anything. And when we're talking about volunteer management, we want probably something motivating, and that wouldn't be it. And also, I would eliminate D as well. So policies are important, and it does fulfill legal requirements for nonprofit organizations, but that's not it's not important to volunteer, management in this sense. It's not broad enough. So and A isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, it does affirm boundaries and enforce but they're sorry, they do affirm boundaries, but they're not necessarily enforceable. I mean, it's just too narrow in scope. And B is correct, because when you're managing volunteers, you want to set their expectations, you want to give them their guardrails so that they can do their work. And so that's the most broad answer in this situation. Okay, great job. I think we have some questions in the chat. Are we good? Okay. All right, who's next? Sandy. Okay, we'll go to Rachel for now. I think Sandy's got a guest. So Rachel, would you mind jumping in?
Sure, I'll try. Haven't been doing very good playing on my own, but what is the most effective way to ensure balance in the volunteer staff relationship? So for this question,
So what are your keywords? Let's start there.
sure. Here, I'm going to go ahead and read the answers first, if you don't mind.
Oh, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, what is the most effective way to ensure balance in the volunteer staff relationship? Conduct a climate survey, form an audit committee of volunteers and staff, establish clear delineation of roles and responsibilities, hold a staff meeting to encourage staff to be more appreciative of volunteer efforts. So I think the key word is volunteer staff relationship, going back to the idea of relationships, and then also balance. And from the answers, I would say this is a LERP question. So it has to do with procedural.
Yeah, okay.
I think I would eliminate D right off. Doesn't seem to be very effective to me.
Right.
I'm not quite sure that A is the answer either. It's not really about ensuring balance. Just that's more of a scanning activity. So then I'm left with B and C. I think I would lean toward C because when you're talking about effective way to ensure balance, B seems more like another scanning, but if it's talking about implementing something, I would go with C.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah, because just in general, just establishing those roles between your team and the volunteers is going to create a good relationship balance. When everyone doesn't know what their roles and responsibilities are, that's when things get a little bit off. Maybe balls start dropping, or people get frustrated because they thought somebody else was going to be doing something. So that's part of the roles and responsibilities.
Marie, I'm struck by a lot of these questions. Do people who study for this find that the hardest part is that there are a few right ones?
Yeah, almost all your questions will be 2 right and 2 wrong, and then you have to decide which is the most right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so let's move on. Any other questions? All right, Sandy, would you mind taking this one?
Sure. Which of the following is the primary difference between an incorporated association and one that is not incorporated? I think it's LERP.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Me-
so I think we've got, I'm going to say that not all of them are going to fall in
Okay.
that. I would just use, Terry, what is your advice on that? I feel like for me, I used LERP and SPY on scenarios, not so much on these more factoid.
questions? Okay.
Yeah, would you have agreed with that, Terry?
Well, it's been a while since I took the test, so I'm not sure
Yeah.
on that.
Okay. Well, I would say on more factoid ones, my recommendation is to really not focus so much on SPY and LERP. Unless you're stuck, then you could go back to the SPY and LERP and see if that helps you work through the question. But I would use SPY and LERP mostly on scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, this is more of a fact-based question. So
Yeah.
this would be you either know it or you don't know it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the options are: it needs to file IRS Form 990. It has the ability to sue or be sued as an organization. It may enter into contracts as an organization. Members are responsible for the debts or legal obligations incurred by the organization. I'd like to eliminate A.
Okay.
I think they both would have to file a 990.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would eliminate C.
Mm-hmm.
I think they both can enter into contracts.
Yep.
And B, it has the ability to be sued or be sued as an organization. Probably they both could be as an organization. And if they're not incorporated, I'm not sure that the members can be responsible for their obligations. Well, I
Yep.
could be totally wrong.
Yep, no,
thinking-
that was absolutely correct. So this is a situation where you've got 3 right, 3 wrong and 1 right, but we know that was a process of elimination because it said primary difference. Those were your keywords that you pulled out of there. So great job. Okay, thanks, Andy. Catherine, you're next. Oh, you're on mute, Catherine.
Take 2. Which of the following determines when a component and its lead association will move to joint planning? A, when the whole organization needs alignment, when the effort will impact the whole organization, when they recognize each other's value in the relationship, when their affiliation agreement requires them both to participate in the effort. Okay.
Can I ask a question in this particular one? Are they meaning kind of a relationship like the 501c6 and 501c3 like when they use the word component?
So when we see the word component, we're talking about like chapters of a parent organization.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I would probably strike C first. And I would probably look at either B or D.
Okay.
Um, um, so am I warm?
You are, yeah, you are.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it's coming down to, I'm trying to think broader.
Well, also look at your keyword. So what's your keyword in this one? So it's gonna, your keywords are often going to be your verbs. The action in this. So what would be your keyword?
Move, and joint planning.
And well, I would have done determines.
Determines, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I have to do as the CSE. I have to determine something. So how am I going to determine something?
Okay. B. But I like.
Yeah. So when I see the word determine, it means to me that I need to look at some sort of policy or some sort of document. There's some sort of document somewhere that I need to refer back to. So, so that's where the affiliation agreement would come into play, because
Okay.
When the affiliation agreement requires both participants to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking too broadly, but that makes sense because, yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. I've got Abigail next.
Okay. In your role as executive director of a newly formed association, how will you establish, integrate, and maintain an effective and representative governance system to guide the association in accomplishing its mission? You would give me the scenario.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I said I would get the scenario. Okay. So, I mean, I think right off, the two that stand out as my scratch offs are A and D, because articles of incorporation and a mission, like, oh, did you just select the answer?
I did. I am so sorry.
The answer is
So
C.
you're already on the right track. You're on the right track with eliminating A and B.
Yeah, I was eliminating A and D because articles of incorporation, that's something that when the whole organization is being started, like, so that made no sense.
Right.
Off the top, they just kind of jumped out the page. Okay. B, set up an office mailing address, bank account. And C, work with volunteer leaders to develop a strategic plan that will help the association accomplish its vision and mission. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the question. I think I know what the answer is because I'm thinking broadly. What the key words is. So establish, integrate, and maintain an effective representative governance system. So you do that by working with a body of people. And so I'm going to go with C. Work with the volunteer leaders to develop a strategic plan that will help it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I don't know if I broke that apart the very best way, but
Yeah, no, you did. You did a good job. So, you know, I would say one of the key words out of the question is the mission. And so we want to, I agree, establish, integrate, and maintain are also key words, but accomplishing the mission. To me, this was a super wordy question. You know, in my mind, I need to pare this down so I can synthesize it a little bit better. So if you can take this down to how will you, you know, establish an effective, how will you, let's see, basically, how do you make an effective and representative governance system to guide the association in establishing its mission? So when we're thinking like that, so we're accomplishing its mission. Yeah, you're right. C is how you do that, because strategic plans, we know strategic plans are tied to the mission, and the strategic plan moves things forward. So strategic planning is always going to be one of those keywords. If you see that, you'll hone in on that and see if that's the right answer. It won't always be the right answer, but focus in on that. Okay, we have a scenario question. Christy, you're next, if you don't mind taking this question. And I'll remind you that when we start with scenario questions, you should start with the question first, then and pull out your keyword, and then move into reading the scenario. So
I'm going to start with the question. What can whatever the organization do to ensure it continues fulfilling its mission? And I think the key word there is mission. And then I would read the scenario. Part of the mission of the National Society of Certified Water Bottlers is to provide continuing education programs that support the professional industry certification of all its members. With more than 100,000 members nationwide, this can be a daunting task. Furthermore, the association that administers the certification has just announced that the minimum amount of CEUs needed for renewal will double beginning with the next renewal cycle. So the question again is, what can the organization do to ensure it continues fulfilling its mission? Okay, and then I'm going to go back. For me, I have to look at what the mission is again. Is to provide continuing education that programs that support the professional industry certification. And then I'll look at the answers. So expand the staff to allow for multiple concurrent programs to occur in cities throughout the United States. Survey the membership to gauge satisfaction, dissatisfaction with the new certification requirement. Survey each state component for satisfaction, dissatisfaction. Establish a system for state components to offer programs that have been approved for certification renewal. So what I'm getting from this is that the decision has already been made for increasing the CEUs, that the mission is to maintain professional industry certification of its members. And when I look at this in terms of they have component state associations, I'm going to take the surveys out right away because I don't think satisfaction matters. I would say establish a system for state components to offer programs that have been approved for certification renewal.
okay, that was D.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, that's correct. So that is absolutely correct. So when you're looking at this, I really like how you worked through that question, first of all. And because you read the question first, you automatically recognize this was about the mission. And when you read the body, you saw that the mission was in that very first sentence. So those other two sentences in this were kind of they weren't important to this question. And then you'll notice that B and C are talking about surveys. And so we know that from SPY, that's the first step, that's a scan. And the question really has nothing to do with scanning. And so we could just automatically eliminate those two. And that leaves A and D. And so as you were explaining that D talks about the certification. And so that would be the correct answer. Okay, thanks, Christy. And somehow my feed has gotten all mixed up. So now we're going to go very random. Kim, could you chime in on this question?
Sure. In general, association policies and procedures should address which three areas? So first of all, I think this is LERP in this particular situation. Actually, wait a second. Yes, I think it is LERP. Is that right? Or not really? It's more.
Yeah, I mean, it is talking about policies and procedures. That's the last step in LERP, but I really think that using the LERP and SPY are most helpful when you're looking at scenarios.
Okay.
And also eliminating answers. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So A is governance, structure, and organization. B is organizational, operational, and financial. C is governance, management, and operations, public image, and public policy. And D is public image, public policy, operational procedures, and organizational procedures. I think that the bylaws really address the governance, structure, and organization. So I would eliminate A. And C because of that. And I don't know actually why I would eliminate D, but I think B is the best answer.
So C is going to be your most broad answer. This one's kind of difficult, and you know, I looked this one up in my handbook. I use I'm not using the same handbook as you guys, but chapter 14 is where I saw it talked about in mine, on top of page 208, but it didn't clearly go into like what this answer would be. But the answer is C. And I think the reason is because it throws governance in there for that reason that you said earlier, because it has bylaws in it. And so that's going to help with policy. Well, policies and procedure manual is part of your governance. So I think that's why C is the correct answer. And it's broader than A. And
Okay.
B, financials would be part of your policies and procedures already. So I would have eliminated it for that reason. All right, so for this one, how about Stacy?
Sure. So with whom should the CSE work to ensure that the board receives timely and accurate information on the activities of the organization? The choices are chief elected officer, chief financial officer, department heads within the association, chairs of standing committees, ad hoc groups, and special interest groups. So the keywords for me would be CSE works to ensure. So it's not going to be, it's not B, C, or D. It has to be A.
Yeah, you're right. So the CSE always works with the CEO, and I'm thinking back to when I first introduced these slides, and I didn't clearly think through my thought on that. Is that I said CEO? We know that as chief. CEO is like the head of an organization, but when we're talking about these exams, CEO stands for chief elected officer, usually your president. And so, yeah, and the CSE always works with the CEO or the chief elected officer. So, yep, perfect. All right. Allie, would you take this one?
Sure. So the question is, your association has identified a desire to develop a new component relationship to better meet a specific area of member need. Which of the following will help ensure that this relationship will remain mutually beneficial for the component and the association? let me see. So A, develop a committee to oversee the relationship with the component. B, develop and implement an affiliation agreement that specifies the roles and responsibilities of all parties. C, develop an RFP and submit to interested parties. Or D, develop a subsidiary that will meet this new member need. Let's see. So I know you mentioned when you said component, that typically means like a chapter or a state affiliate or something like that. And so that I think is one of the key words, a new component relationship.
So what are
And
your,
then-
what's the action? What do you as a CEO have to get out? What do you have to do with this question? You have to make sure it remains mutually beneficial. So to me, that's my keyword for me, because that's what I have to do as a CSC. I have to make sure this remains mutually beneficial. So which one of these questions is gonna make that happen? I mean, which one of these answers is gonna make that happen? So we're talking about, you're right, though, we are talking about a relationship. And so what makes that relationship between the component and the association work?
I want to say B, develop and implement an affiliation agreement to specify the roles and responsibilities of all parties so that you can make sure that those roles and responsibilities are mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that's correct. Oops, I can get this turn right. Okay, so yeah, because A and D, they just don't make a lot of sense. And I'm sorry, A and C don't make a lot of sense. And then D contradicts. That's kind of contradictory. So, okay, good job. Thank you, Allie. Jennifer, would you mind taking this question?
Sure. You are the new CSC for a national association. Recently, you attended a monthly meeting of a state chapter. The chapter president took you aside and expressed concern about the lack of communication for the parent organization. What is the first thing you would do upon returning to your office? And these are answers. I'll not read them all since we had a nice little scenario question. Let's see.
So since this is a scenario, what would you say this is SPY or LERP?
I would say SPY.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Let's see. So lack of communication. And I would imagine if there lack of communication to that chapter, it's probably overall and not that chapter specifically. Let's see. I wouldn't ask a board member to call them, of course. Or write an apology. I would imagine they apologized in person. I would do C, conduct a survey of the chapter's boards of directors to evaluate existing products and services.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So because this is SPY, one of our keywords would be first thing. And we know that because of SPY, survey is always one of the first things we want to do. So C is the correct answer. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another scenario here. I'm not sure who can W Park take this one.
Yep, sure. Okay. All right. You are the CSE of a national organization that has recently developed statewide chapters. While the chapters seem to be successful in reaching the local membership, there is tension between the chapters and their national counterpart. Which of the following is the best solution for settling this tension? So, all right. A, hold a formal meeting with leaders of the local chapters to discuss the issue. B, release a public statement. I feel like that can just get gone immediately. Suggest that the National Board of Directors be restructured to proportionately better reflect more highly concentrated membership areas. Or D, decide the tension between
state chapters and the national organization is a clear indicator that any success disband. All right, so I would immediately take away B and D. They just seem either really far down the path or just outside the scope of a CSE. So that leaves me with A and C. I kind of think maybe A, hold a formal meeting with the leaders of the local chapters to discuss the issue. My only maybe hesitancy here is leaders of the local chapter feels more like maybe potentially a volunteer piece to me. So is that more of a CEO duty instead of a CSE duty? But I still think A is closer, is the best answer.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you eliminated it down to C, and to just restructure based on that would be, that's very sweeping, right? And dramatic change.
Yeah.
Where A would be more, you know, let's kind of talk through what's going on and let's see if we can get on the same page, and find some common ground. And you'll find that a lot of times your answers will be about communicating, and you'll see that as you're beginning to study for the CAE exam, that communicate, that's really emphasized. So if you see a question or an answer that talks about communicating, that's an indicator that it's a good answer to look at to see if it's the right answer. All right, so now we've got some more scenario questions coming up. And let's see. What else do I have? I have two, let's see. I think I've been through everyone. Kim, have I had you?
Yes, you have, but I'm happy to, maybe I can get this one right.
I'm back to the beginning. Wow, okay.
Okay, you have just taken a new job as a CSE. One of your first tasks was to evaluate the committee structure of the organization. The membership is a healthy and growing 10,000 individual members. However, according to staff, recruiting volunteers to serve on the 15 standing committees has been a struggle for the past 4 years. As you review the various committee minutes, you notice that many of the committees meet only once or twice per year and seem not to accomplish any substantive work. Who should own the solution? A, the board of directors. B, you as the CSE after discussion with your senior staff. C, you as the CSE with input from the board of directors. Or D, the bylaws committee. Well, I would immediately eliminate D, the bylaws committee, and A, the board of directors, because I think the CSE absolutely has to be involved in the decision-making for this situation, or the resolution of this situation. And I think there's already been discussion with staff, so I would assume senior staff was a big part of that. And I think that you would want input from the board of directors when you are making any sort of across the board changes to the ways your committees operate. So I would pick C.
Well, the answer is actually going to be the bylaws committee. And so let's work through this question. This one's actually kind of a difficult question because it's extremely wordy, and your keywords are actually not necessarily in the question. So when we look at who should own the solution, we are looking for who, but your keywords are going to be in the scenario. And so we're looking for those actions. What are you as a CEO or CSE supposed to do? And it says right here, I don't know if my mouse shows up on the screen, but it says one of your first tasks was to evaluate the committee structures of the organization. So while it's saying we know as CSEs that we can't do everything ourselves, and we have to task things out. So then we look at the answers here and who's the best person to do that. When we're looking at standing committees, So then we continue to read through this question. It's talking about standing committees. And almost always standing committees are going to be in your bylaws. And so the only person, if you have a bylaws committee, that's who would be doing it. And in this situation, they did offer up a bylaws committee. And so that would be the correct answer. And remind me, what was your answer? It was C?
It was C.
So I think that would be accurate. If you did not have a bylaws committee, I think that would be your next best answer. So, okay, that was a tough one. Thanks, Kim. Anybody have questions about this one? Somebody's got something in the chat. Let's see. Okay. All right, so we've got the same lead here, but we have a different answer. I mean, a different question and different answers. And Catherine, would you mind taking this one?
You've just taken a new job as a CSE. One of your first tasks was to evaluate the committee structure of the organization. The membership is a healthy and growing 10,000 individual members. However, according to staff, recruiting volunteers to serve on the 15 standing committees has been a struggle for the past 4 years. As you review the various committee minutes, you note that many of the committees meet only once or twice per year and seem not to accomplish any substantive work. Which is the best solution to this scenario? Refer the situation to the bylaws committee. Send every member a notice asking for volunteers. Look at the strategic plan and create committee charges that will contribute to the achievement of the plan. Review the needs of the association and reorganize the volunteer committee structure based on form follows function. Okay, I think I would strike B first. Is that committee charges or changes? In C. That's confusing me.
Look at the strategic plan, create committee charges. No, I would say charges. That would be correct.
Okay. That will contribute to the achievement plan, review the needs. Okay. Okay. I'm struggling here.
Okay, so what are we trying to solve here? So what is the best solution to this scenario? But what is this? What is the what's the problem? What did we find was the problem in that?
Sounds to me like there's too many committees not meeting often enough.
Yeah, so yeah, they're struggling. Yeah, they're struggling to find volunteers and there's not enough, they're not working enough, right? There's not enough work for them.
I mean, D stands out to me because if they do a needs assessment and realize they maybe don't need 15 committees, they could combine it down and get more bang for their meeting buck, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like C
is the right one. And
yeah.
The reason
because
is
of the
that
strategic plan.
Strategic plan, that's your keyword. That's so when you see that in an answer, look at that and see if that actually fits the question and the answer. So in this case, it would. And the strategic plan, you can tie volunteers to your strategic plan and really send them off with a mission, and that would reignite finding work for them. And the mission often will inspire, people to meet more often so they can accomplish a purpose and a goal. So great, thanks, Catherine. That one was a tough one. Okay, so I'm at the end of all the sample questions. Do you guys have questions about just test taking and some of these tips that we went through, or is there a question you want to go back through and work through?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. And
No.
this might completely identify me as the weakest link here, which I'll admit totally possible. But I'd love to hear from others on the work group too, is like, if you studied for today, which, how did you find, were you able to answer these questions, and, were your resources the same as Marie's? I guess I'm struggling a little bit of like the stack of books here and like how to handle them, and what you found best, Marie, and how others find after today, what that works also for you guys. Thank you.
Go ahead. Somebody's going to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on the books because that's a good question. I would put your emphasis on the PPAM and the law book are your two big ones. The other books are interesting, and there may be a question or two. As an example, if finance is not your thing, then the finance one can be helpful to give you good kind of basics on some of the accounting and things like that. But really, the PPAM and the law, I think, are your two primary resources. Marie, what would you add to that?
Yep, I would agree. Those were my two go-to resources. I read both of those cover to cover and found those to be very helpful. And actually, a lot of these scenario questions or all the questions that we did today, I was able to look them up, in my resources and work through those questions. So, yeah, I would say that's true, that those are kind of the Bibles of, the CAE exam. So those are two good books.
Also, I wouldn't use today as a barometer because this is the first class. And so there could be material on here that you haven't had even a chance to look at. So, I don't think, an expectation for today is everybody would ace all the questions. It's, again, I think a lot of what today is about too is just the approach to answering the questions. And I think as you go through each week of the study program, and we've seen this with all the groups, really getting a comfort level at sort of how you would approach the questions is really the biggest thing. I mean, yes, there will be some questions where you just need to know the fact. But most of it, like Marie was saying at the beginning, it's really testing executive leadership. So it's a lot of how you would work through a situation and how and that way to come up with an answer, as opposed to book knowledge saying, the answer is X because it's a fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't know if you have it already structured for them, Terry, or if this is how the SAE does it, but if you're able to just focus on maybe a domain or two a week,
We do a domain a week. Yep.
Yeah, focus in on that. And, if you think you're an expert in that area, I would still encourage you to read through it because, I love governance. This is what makes me tick. But the thing is what you sometimes make work for your associations, because we also live in the real world, it doesn't always fit nicely into a test. So some of it has to also be some of that, the book, by the book. And so make sure you just go back and look through whatever your expertise is and make sure you're realigning yourself with how the book says you need to do it. Because I think that sometimes that can be a blind spot for yourself, I guess.
Melissa was asking about the study guide. So there is one that ASAE publishes, the CAE study guide. The most recent edition came out in 2020. And it has in there the test questions, the sample test questions, like 100 questions. And I think you're able to go and get another 100 from from ASA, sorry. The link to the study guide is on our website. It's on that CAE information page that I sent to y'all.
And it's not the user guide. I think maybe I got confused.
Okay. And then just to follow up what Marie said, I think as you're going through the different domains, you will find some domains are easier for you and other domains are more challenging for you. I would weigh which domain, again, if there's one that you feel more comfortable with, maybe spend more time on ones you're not as comfortable with. And also, as Marie noted at the beginning, you have to do sort of a calculation of percentage of test. If a domain is 5% of test, another part is 21% of test, then don't sweat the 5% one, because that means out of 100, 200 questions, there may be a handful. And just talking to some people who haven't passed the exam, who've come very close, it's usually in those 1 or 2 areas where they struggle a little bit in, where they just fall short. But on a positive side, we've had a very good success rate with the study group. Very good. I think out of the last class, we had over 9. And again, not everybody's taking it like you all, not everybody's taking it the next one. So, you know, a lot of it's this conversation and just the thinking through. And I know also some of the study groups have broken up into like smaller informal study groups during the week. Like some people say, hey, let's get together on a Wednesday night for an hour. So, you know, again, whatever works for you, but I guess don't stress out. You can hear me say that every week. Don't stress out.
Yeah, definitely don't stress out.
Try not to, at least. I'll give you that. Try not to stress out.
Yeah.
You all know a lot more than you think you do at this point.
Abby?
I had a question related to note taking. Did you have any suggestions for how? I mean, I have all the books, and I too am intimidated by them, and I'm trying to break it up and write the most important things. It may be a personal style, but I was just curious how you approached it.
I started out, I actually started taking notes, but then I abandoned that idea because I felt like I was writing more than I was reading because it took so long. So I ended up just marking my books up. I had a highlighter and I would sit with the highlighter and I would just highlight things that I thought were important, so that when it came, you know, a little while before the test, right before I was about to take the test, I spent time just flipping through and just grabbing those highlights out of the book and reading through those. And that seemed to help me. Yeah. And speaking of right before the test, I would not study like the night. Don't cram. Let your brain rest. You have this, you know, if you're do it over the weekend before, and then give yourself a day or two just to unwind and not focus on this, because you don't want to overstress. You got this, just like Terry said. Whitney?
Good morning. I had a question about one of the questions that we covered.
Okay.
It was the one in your role as executive director and as newly formed, how will you establish, integrate, and maintain an effective representative governance?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it. This one here?
System. Yes.
Okay.
So this one tripped me up because it said, how will you establish an effective and representative governance system to accomplish the mission? And I got tripped up between C and D. Because C was talking about accomplishing the mission, its vision and mission, help the association, but D seemed to talk more about establishing a representative governance system.
Yeah, I agree. This is a difficult question. So the reason why I would eliminate D is because it says it's a newly formed association. So instead of a newly forming association, I think if it said ing, like it's going to be happening, that then I would have chosen D. But since it's already formed, we don't need to have an interim board of directors creating bylaws and things. So that's where C would come into play. And so since it's already formed, the next step is that we need a strategic plan.
Okay. Thank you.
I think, one of the other things is, a representative governing system is kind of throws the question off a little bit, in my opinion, just because, a strategic plan does help move everything forward. And I guess that is part of the vision and the mission with the strategic plan. So,
yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's
it's not a governance system really isn't something we just throw around in our office every day. Right. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that question is a little difficult and difficultly worded.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there questions, thoughts, comments? This is good discussion.
Before folks jump off, yes, we will do domain 2 next week, and we will follow the domains in order. So each week we will go one domain at a time.
Abigail, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I think it was Abby that asked the question about taking notes, because I started kind of doing the same thing too, but then what I've been trying to do is use the outline in the orange book, you know, on the first page, like there's this outline right here. And just kind of list the page numbers for where I'm reading that particular information. So then when I refer back to it, I can see all of my highlights and other notes. Because the note taking was also like slowing me down or just confusing my whole thought process.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Great idea.